The Path to Authenticity is brought to you by GIA Miami. Founded by world-class mental health experts, GIA provides advanced care for difficult-to-treat conditions, including anxiety, medication-resistant depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Using state-of-the-art methods, GIA can help people recover from conditions when more traditional approaches can't. Dr. Antonello Bonci has assembled an expert team serving international clientele in a modern and resplendent Miami setting. If you or someone you love is suffering from depression, anxiety, OCD, or other mental health concerns, call GIA at 833-713-0828. You can learn more about GIA by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting giamiami.com.
Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
I'm Erica C. Barnett, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity, episode 193 for September 20th, 2022. So, in the process of producing the last episode of season 1 of Men Who Talk, and preparing the launch for season 2, which I'm going to start recording on Clubhouse in the beginning of October. So I'll keep you guys posted with that. Also doing some work on the Substack thing, which if you've listened, I've mentioned that before. I'll put a link in the show notes. But this episode is sort of a continuation of the recovery theme for September, which is National Recovery Month. It features a conversation with the Seattle journalist Erica C. Barnett, who is also the author of the book Quitter, which is a good read. So I hope you enjoy it. Here you go, Erica Barnett. How are you?
That's always such a weird question these days, but I am good. I'm really good. I'm about to take some time off, so I'm especially good because I haven't had a lot of time off in the last 6 months or so.
Well, and I assume that's because you just published your book. And first of all, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you investing the time in this. And I reached out to you. I don't know. When did your book come out? Maybe a month ago at this point?
It came out in July, and we're talking near the end of August.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I saw the review of it in the New York Times book review on Sunday, and I thought, I need to reach out to her. So I tracked you down, and here we are. So why don't you tell the folks about your book?
Sure. So my book is called Quitter, a Memoir of Drinking, Relapse, Recovery. And it is, it's about my experiences as an alcoholic who spent 6 years or so trying to quit and relapsing and trying again until I quit drinking for this period of sobriety is the longest I've had in my life since high school. And so it's been about a little under 6 years now. So the book just kind of covers, what all my relapses were like, what they taught me, my time in kind of the trenches of the treatment industry, and what I learned, and the sort of philosophy, I guess, of addiction and recovery that I have developed through my own experiences and through, observing the experiences of others that I've met on this journey.
Well, and another thing you did that I admired is how you kind of set the stage for how you evolved into an alcoholic, from childhood, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because, a lot of women now and girls start drinking much, much younger than they did when I was, a young girl drinking. Mm-hmm. So I thought I was really, really, advanced and I guess, sophisticated for my age. I started drinking when I was about 13. And mostly, my experience with drugs and alcohol as a kid and as a young adult were mostly around drugs. And I didn't love drinking. And I really, I quit drinking when I was in high school, as I mentioned, and didn't drink through college really, because it wasn't my thing. I was very achievement oriented. And, it just didn't appeal to me, and I didn't like the way it made me feel. So the other thing that I write about in the book, sorry for the pause there, okay. Is the fact that I started really drinking heavily when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, which is surprisingly really common among women. There is sort of the trajectory where you start drinking as a young child and never stop. But there's also a lot of women who, because of the pressures that you face, when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, kind of trying to build your professional life, maybe have a relationship, maybe have kids, women start drinking and they fall into, these patterns of habitual drinking that can lead to alcoholism if you're predisposed that way. And for me, I was working in industry. I'm a journalist. And I was working in an industry where drinking every single day was just kind of the norm. And I was very uncomfortable in my own skin. I felt like an imposter. I was really young when I started working in journalism. And, I rose through the ranks pretty fast. And I felt very uncomfortable. And one of the cures for feeling uncomfortable is to take yourself out of a situation, mentally and emotionally. And that's what drinking did for me. And so, the first time I tried to get sober was in 2008. So I was 30 or 31 years old. I think I was 30. And I'm 42 now. I have a little under 6 years sober. So you can do the math. It took me a long time. From first realizing like, okay, this is a problem I need to deal with and thinking it would be easy to actually getting sober like 6 years later, a little more than 6 years later. And that is like, and so just that compressed little period of time is when my real drinking, got going, and the kind of nature of my addiction became apparent to me.
Well, and one of the things I've kind of been taught, I don't have firsthand knowledge because I'm not a woman, but, for women drinking who have problematic relationships with alcohol or drugs, it tends to be a little more relational than it is for guys. Mm-hmm. And like you talk about, a lot of the habitual drinking at that time in your life came about because you wanted to be a part of a group of men who were kind of, running the paper and right. You were trying to get in.
Well, and it's also, I worked in the alt weekly world, which, I don't know how old your listeners are, but it was a big deal in the 90s. Just trust me. And so I used to work basically until I quit my job at the last weekly paper I worked at, The Stranger. I worked in the alt weekly world, the free weekly world. And, there are definitely women in that world. It's not perfectly gender balanced, but, the balance of power is definitely, towards men. My bosses were typically men. And the women that I saw doing really well were the women who, could basically drink the guys under the table. And I wanted to be one of those women. And at the same time, I also I felt like a fraud. Like I felt like, well, I'm not as cool as these people, or I'm not as educated as these people, or I don't have as much experience. And being a drinking buddy of somebody is a way to feel a little more equal to them, I think.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that I was a fraud or that I, wasn't cool. I mean, it's fine not to be quote unquote cool too. But I never felt comfortable. And so it was very much making myself feel comfortable around other people. So as you said, relational.
Yeah. Well, and, honestly, I was drawn to your book because you're a journalist, and, having some writing experience myself. And one of the things I was taught, and I believe, is that there are certain things that are written about so much that it's hard to stand out, and like a love poem or a love song. And in order to do it effectively, you really have to come at it from a different angle. You kind of have to have a level of mastery to do it effectively, and I feel that way about books like yours, because there are a lot of people who write books about their journey into recovery or their trials and tribulations before. But usually, I mean, if I don't know they can write, then I'm probably not going to read it. And my favorite one of all that I've read was Pete Hamill's A Drinking Life, which is just incredible.
I think too, like as a journalist, like I know that, I wouldn't pitch a story if I didn't have a unique angle. I'm a freelancer, and so that's kind of how I think. And so I wouldn't pitch my own story if I didn't think it was something that, not that it's unusual to have experienced a lot of relapses and also feel that, I have learned from each of those relapses and that they weren't failures. But I mean, I know a lot of people feel like that, but it's not something that I've read. And so I kind of, I felt like, well, I have an angle, I guess, on my own life that I think just is not represented. And I don't know if it's because of the shame that's associated with relapse for a lot of people, or if it's that like women are not permitted to be kind of the sort of drunk that I was, which is, very sloppy and messy and unattractive and not pretty and all those things. It's not a clean, straight arc from, rock bottom to recovery. But I felt like I had, I could tell the story that was so common to so many people. And I knew that I could, I mean, I have some confidence in my writing. Of course, this is my first book, so I had no idea if I could write 100,000 words. So
is that what it was? 100,000 words?
Well, I think the first draft was like 125,000. And I think now it's somewhat below that. I had a great editor who, I'm such a big believer in being edited.
Yeah.
And I love editors because they do things that, I am not particularly skilled at, like seeing things that are duplicated or, for example, seeing entire people that, kind of make the same point as somebody else so you can cut them.
Right.
And, so I had a great editor who cut it way down, but yeah, it was very long at first.
Yeah. Well, and it's on like it's on a great imprint too. I mean, it's Viking, for your first book. It's funny. I had a guest a while back. She has a podcast. It's called Dear Young Rocker. And she went to college and got an MFA in creative writing, and she wrote a memoir. And she can write, and she took it around and pitched it to a lot of different publishers. And finally somebody just told her, if nobody knows who you are, it's really hard to get a memoir published. And
yes.
So the fact that you got it done on a major publisher, I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, I had help along the way. I have friends who've written books, and so they were able, I mean, there's like a little secret network in every profession, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I called all the women I knew who had written books and said, how did you do it? And I followed in their footsteps, and, and I didn't just sort of try to figure it out on my own, because I don't think, I mean, the publishing industry is really tough. It's tough to break into. And yeah, nobody knows who I am. I mean, outside of Seattle. And so, so I took a lot of advice. And I took it, pretty slow. And I just did everything people suggested. I mean, it's a little like AA in a way. I was like, well, you know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing.
Let me just follow you. Yeah. Well, the title's great too. I mean, I really like the title. Yeah. Which is,
I sold it under a different title that had a profanity in it. And then I chickened out.
So are you willing to share with us what that was?
Oh yeah, sure. It was going to be called Shit-Faced.
Oh, okay.
Which, ended up not exactly fitting the book anyway. And also I was like, well, what I kept thinking were two things. Do I want my grandparents to be horrified just by the cover? I mean, they're going to be horrified by what's in it. But, and do I want it to sell at like Walmart and Target and,
right.
And of course, like, I don't want to cut out any potential readers or buyers. So, and I think the title Quitter is actually a better title and describes the book much better.
Yeah, that's, especially the relapse process, and, it fits really well, I think. So
yeah, it's a process of quitting over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So you also have a website. Would you describe it as an online publication?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so coming out of, at the risk of, making this too drawn out, coming out of alt weeklies, we decided, a friend of mine and I from The Stranger decided we wanted to start a website. And, that kind of does the same things that alt weeklies do, but a little less snarky and juvenile. So we started a website called Publicola, that, turned into ultimately, what I do now, which is a website called The C is for Crank. And, I started that website right after I got sober, and, and we're getting ready to actually rebrand it. And when is this going to run?
In a couple weeks. I mean, I can, time it.
Well,
if you want, we can figure that out.
This isn't like particularly germane to the topic, but we are in about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to rebrand it back to the original site name, which is Publicola. It's a local news site. I am a really deeply sourced local Seattle reporter. I've been doing it for a little over 20 years out here in Seattle. Lately, I cover homelessness a lot, and I cover addiction quite a bit because, it's obviously an interest of mine. Mm-hmm. And that's like, I mean, crazily, which is not what I ever would have expected. And kind of the reason the site has a silly name is because I didn't realize it would become, my full-time job in my life.
Yeah.
And now it's like, it's amazing. I mean, I have an employee. Like, what? Yeah. I never would have thought that was possible.
So I wanted to ask you, why the C is for Crank? What's the significance of that?
Oh boy. So basically the explanation behind the title, when I worked at The Stranger, and one of the reasons I left kind of the alt weekly publishing world and The Stranger specifically, is because people would get in the comments, like comments were a really big thing back in the late 2000s. And they would just be like real assholes to me in particular. And my middle initial is C in my byline.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Erica C. Barnett. And they would like speculate about what the C stands for. And you can imagine all the things they said. Yes. And it was just like this running joke on The Stranger's website. What horrible thing can we call Erica today? And so I started a column at Publicola when I left The Stranger, called The C is for Crank. And it was basically just my cranky opinions about things in the city. Mm-hmm. And so Crank does not refer to the drug. See,
Yeah.
this is part of why I need to rebrand, because
Right.
it is a very
It's confusing. Yeah.
title, but it's also been around for 6 years now almost. And so people are a little used to it here in Seattle.
Okay. I like Publicola.
I know, it's a good name.
It is a good name.
My
Yeah.
friend, I can't take credit for it. My friend Josh came up with it. He's the person that my book is dedicated to.
And was turned out to be a very big person in your life, right?
Yeah. He is probably like the main character in the story besides me, because he's the one person who was kind of there through all of it, except for, my parents. But of course, they live in Houston, so he had a real front row seat to everything. Yeah.
It's an interesting, the way the relationship evolved is it would be something that a reader would like to read about, I think, I started to talk about it and I thought, I don't want to give this away. They should read the book. Right.
Yeah, he is my great friend.
Yeah. Well, and all of us who go through things like this, have those people, who show up for us. And when I say all of us who go through things like this, I mean, I've really come to believe that for me, it was alcoholism, but everybody has something, and there's so much shame associated with addiction, and a tendency to look down upon ourselves. And there are certain mutual support programs that in some ways kind of reinforce that shame. But I really believe I am no different than any other human being. We all have wounds. We all have ways that we figure out how to manage our distress. And for me, that was alcohol until it became problematic,
Yeah. One really positive thing that I have noticed over time is that, like, I have a lot of coping tools that I didn't have before. And one of them is just kind of the ability to put things in perspective. And I think a lot of that did come from going to meetings and listening to people's stories, because what's crazy about my life now is that, like, I am the patient person of all my friends.
Oh, yeah.
And that would be, if you had known me, even, 20 years ago, before I was even drinking, like, or 15 years ago, I had no patience for anything. I would get so aggravated and like throw things and just throw tantrums. And now, like, last Friday, my wallet got stolen, and I was very irritated for about 5 minutes. And then I just kind of thought, well, people's wallets get stolen every day. You can call all these companies. It'll probably take you about 15 minutes, and then you can go on with your life, and it's fine. And probably, whoever, because, I found out because somebody had stolen a bunch of money from my cards and just taken it out on cash. And I just thought, you know what? Maybe they needed that cash today. Yeah. And I feel like that is a very AA attitude, at least among the people that I know. And it's not an attitude I had before I started kind of just talking to people and getting their perspective on their lives after recovery.
Well, and the ultimate benchmark for me, like I can say the same thing, the exact same, but it's like when you've been where I've been and went through, like, I had to be stopped. I could not stop drinking. I had to be stopped. And if I can get through that and get to the other side, like, nothing else is really that big a deal.
Exactly.
For the most part. So the perspective that you're talking about, that's where, and it's just kind of happened naturally that I don't freak out about stuff.
Yeah. And I think about, like, I still have drinking dreams, like, to this day, all the time. And I think about what it was like when I was drinking still all the time. And when I think about, like, just what a regular day was like, I was a morning to night, like, all day drinker. And, and even before I lost my job, it was horrible in one way. And after I lost my job, it was horrible in a whole other way, because there was just nothing to stop me from drinking like all day long, except when I was passed out. And when I think about what that was like and compare it to like, what just a really crappy day now is like, my, for example, the stranger, my old, employer, they threatened to sue me to stop the book from being published at one point. And I am I think most rational Americans in our litigious society, I'm very afraid of lawyers, right?
Yeah.
That was a bad day.
Yeah.
But it was not nearly as bad as any just normal random Tuesday before, in the last couple of years before I quit drinking.
Mm. Yeah. Well, you got through that, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, exactly.
So, the whole theme of this podcast really is, I feel like the more of us, who do what we actually want to be doing with our lives, the better off we all are, and that we all deserve to do what we want to do. And so, how does all of this fit into your vision for your life and what you wanted for your life and your sense of purpose and meaning? What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And this is, since my book is about sobriety, I'll talk about sobriety again. Before I got sober and before I even started drinking and before I was even old enough to like work at a job of any kind, I had this path laid out for myself where I would, go to college, go to school, get good grades, get a scholarship, go to college, get a job in journalism, and be a journalist and kind of work my way up whatever ranks I felt like I wanted to work my way up. And that's what I did. And I, sacrificed, I guess, everything else to that goal. That was the most important thing to me. And then, because of my drinking and because of my behavior, I lost all that, sort of all at once, in that, I lost my job. I was fired, and I had never been fired from a job before in my life. And I thought my job was everything because I had made it myself, and then I didn't have that job anymore. And then I had to get sober, and then I kind of came out of that. And I think what actually ended up prompting my sort of realization that I could get sober and that I could actually live a different life than I had been living is just this realization that you can, within the confines that are created, by society and by whatever your circumstances are, you can do anything with your life. And particularly for me, I could do anything with my life. I don't have kids. I don't need a lot of money to live. I like to have a lot of money to live, but I don't need it. And so I just decided I was going to kind of start from scratch. And what that meant for me was I got a job, and it was just a job, working in a nonprofit doing PR communications. And I started rebuilding, my sort of reporting credentials. I started this silly little website that, then one day somebody gave me some advice about how to make some money off it without having to do advertising, which I had seen, the sort of cliff of advertising falling off. That was kind of killing the newspaper industry. And so this is a very roundabout way of saying I now, today I'm sitting in my house. I work from my couch essentially. I make plenty of money, to have savings and to have an IRA, which is unthinkable before to me. And I also get to cover whatever I want, anything I want to cover on my website, dictated by, will anybody want to read this? But,
right.
You don't need that many people to read a website and give you money to make it work. And so I now have this life that I would never have had if I had, even figured out a way to moderate my drinking, which I don't think would have been possible after a certain point. But when I was sort of stuck in the parameters of what I thought was possible, I was going to continue on that same path forever, probably. And so just kind of having that realization, and I remember it really vividly when I just sort of thought to myself, I think I was in detox for the last time, just thinking to myself, you can do anything you want with your life from here on out. And realizing that that was true, and then taking action on it. It really, it's changed everything since then.
Yeah. Myself, I recognized early on in my sobriety that one of the advantages I had was there were things I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I've talked about this in the podcast a little bit, but the age of onset of alcohol and drug use has changed so much since I got sober. I was in a facility where I was 23. There's probably one other guy in his 20s, and everybody else was like 38 plus. And
right.
My roommate was 67, and there was an 88-year-old on the unit. Now that's an aberration. Everyone is under 25 or 27. And it's just different. And I think with that, I encounter so many emerging adult males who they don't even know what they're interested in.
Uh-huh.
Let alone what
kind of a sense of possibility too, because it's like, I do, I sometimes wish I had had a little more time. Like I had gotten it sooner, but I also think I got it when I got it, and I got it when it was possible for me.
Yeah.
But it would have been amazing if I had, somehow been able at 30 to quit like I thought I was going to, but it just didn't work out that way.
Well,
and that's fine,
I
can't do anything about it.
I was that kid in meetings who, everybody'd be like, I wish I got sober when I was your age. I'd heard that all the time. And I guess, I was grateful, and I am grateful, but also like it isn't great. It's never great for anybody. Like nobody ever wants to go through this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it gets pretty old to be a kid hearing that over and over again. And I imagine a lot more for guys or men or women who don't want to be sober and they're young,
Yeah. I do think that one thing that I didn't realize at the time that I've realized as I've gotten a little older is like, it is much easier. It just, people my age, I'm 42, and people my age, are just more settled down, and the pressure, there is, my God, during the pandemic, it's, the pressure to kind of always be drinking. If you are on social media all the time, like I am, is crazy, but you can turn it off. Whereas I think when you're 23, 25, even 30, it is just a lot harder, especially if you're like a white collar person, if you're a lawyer or a journalist or a politician, kind of in those circles. I can't speak for any other circles, but I know that like in my circles, it is very much the norm to just, to just drink all the time. Especially when you're
that's where people meet people, and that was a revelation for me, was there are people out there who don't drink this way.
There are people who don't drink. I talk about this in my book. There's a huge percentage of the population of America that does not drink and has never drank,
right?
Or has only done it occasionally. And I was like, where are those people? Because they're not where I live.
Right. Well, in my family, it was just what everybody did, the guys especially, some of the women, but the guys especially. And it was kind of like, for me, the beginning of I wanted to connect with the guys in my life. That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
And
I had the opposite experience. I didn't know anybody who drank, growing up, because, I was raised by my grandparents until I was 7 or 8. And they're Southern Baptists. They don't drink. Mm-hmm. And I never knew anybody who drank until I was quite a bit older. But but I also didn't know anything about drinking. Like nobody ever taught me, about, the risks. And I don't know that I would have listened because kids don't listen to anything, but
Yeah. No, and I had a blast doing it too. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but I also, I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Yeah. Same. I mean, I had a lot of, I never liked drinking. I'll be honest. Like it made me feel more comfortable, but it always made me feel like crap. When I was young, what I liked was drugs, and I just never got back into them because I knew it was, I did a lot of psychedelics, and I think it would have probably fried my brain had I kept doing them in some way, some form or fashion. But yeah, I mean, but I am much happier overall as a person than, with whatever small sacrifice, if it's even a sacrifice of not being able to do that stuff.
Yeah. Well, honestly, reading your book you did a lot of acid. Like, yeah, in my head, I'm like, there's a wine bottle on the cover. Like, I didn't expect this turn of like daily dropping acid daily in high school, man.
Yeah, well, it was the 90s and that was the drug.
Yeah.
And, and I certainly, I don't regret that at all. I wish, that's not a great message, and I wouldn't say that to anybody's kid. But,
right. Well,
but when you're a kid in the suburbs and you're good at school, which is not to say like smart, because there are plenty of smart people who are not good at school, but it was incredibly boring for me.
Yeah.
And, and I still did well despite that, which is, probably, again, this is not a lesson for anybody's child.
Yeah.
It is a bad way to structure your life, but
well, and
for me, it didn't turn out that bad.
One of the things I love about sobriety, and I'm sure you can say this at this point, like I can look back on it now and it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And even not only that struggle, other struggles in my life, every job I've ever had led to the next job. Every struggle I had, I got through it. I was stronger, healthier, whatever, back to the perspective thing. It's one of the coping skills we get from this is the ability to just kind of take it all in and experience.
Yeah.
Life.
I mean, I do want to push back on just one thing though, like, or at least kind of add a bit of context for me, which is like, I never got arrested, and I did a lot of stuff that if I was not, if I was Black, if I was visibly Mexican American, my mom is Mexican American, but, I have very pale skin. I would have been arrested like so many times.
Yeah.
And, even the time I talk about getting caught shoplifting, and that was here in Seattle, and they didn't arrest me. And I've seen people get arrested for shoplifting. I saw, like, after I got sober, I saw a guy stealing food, a Black guy stealing food at the supermarket. And, 2 security guards tackled him, threw him down an escalator. And then the cops came and carried him away. And it's like, okay, that would never happen to me.
Yeah.
And so like I had like people lifting me up, and I had, and I had privilege, and I had a lot of luck too. But, and I think that all combined to, to kind of this story that I have now, which is like, I was able to learn a bunch of stuff, but I think there's a lot of points when that learning could have been disrupted by the cops, probably by the cops, because there's just a lot of stuff I did that I didn't get caught for because nobody was really watching me.
Well, my last night of drinking ended in jail, and my first day of sobriety started in jail. I was arrested a couple times.
You just stayed sober since then.
Yeah.
Like that was the kick in the pants.
Well, I couldn't stop. There were things I wanted to do in life. And for me, I grew up in a blue collar town in the Midwest, and there were, this is part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast is because, in some ways I was discouraged from doing the things I actually wanted to do. And, you know, and one of the things that was literally said to me by a family member in my senior year in high school was, what are you going to do? Work at McDonald's so you can write? I mean, their idea of what was possible, just, you know, it was limited to their life experience.
Yeah.
And so I ended up becoming a union carpenter.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like, get a trade, you know, and back to the authenticity thing, looking back on my life, I can see where every time I got off course, I mean, in some way or another, I was betraying myself. I wasn't being authentic. And that is like, it's an existential crisis when you get to the point and to me, that's kind of what this was. Like, I was in such distress. That's why I was drinking. I needed to change the way I felt.
I mean, I think that's such a good point. And like, and this is another place where I feel just like, I was really lucky. I mean, even though like you could look at my life and say, well, you were lucky, but you blew it. You know, I mean, if you stop at, you know, 2014 or so, but like, I mean, my family, like all along, I mean, there were these, you know, perhaps excessively high expectations, which can also, I think, work to people's detriment. They probably did work to my detriment, but at the same time, there was this, you know, if I said I wanted to be a writer, which I did, you know, my grandparents would say, you're the most brilliant writer in the world. And I know you can do it. And, you know, you're going to go to college and you're going to get straight A's and, you know, and they're like working class people too. But that was just, you know, the expectation was like, okay, you want to be a writer, you're going to do it. Not like you're going to stay in Mississippi and, you know, work at the JCPenney or whatever.
And that's kind of what it is. And the world I come from, I mean, most people don't leave.
Yeah, same.
I mean, I left to get sober, you know, and I have other family members who never got out of my hometown until they left to go get sober. And, and it's such a big world, but, you know, the community, small towns and mine isn't tiny, but you know, 50, 75,000 people, but, yeah, it's different. It's just a different way of life.
Yeah. My family still lives in Mississippi in the same town that I started out in. And my parents live in Houston because they wanted, you know, a better life and they wanted to get out of Mississippi because there's just not a lot of opportunity there. And just not a lot of room, you know, for people who, have like big dreams for themselves, you know, I hate to say, and that's not to stereotype an entire state, but in the small town that, you know, that I was from, I think that is fair to say.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you write. I really, and I appreciate, you sent me a PDF of the book and you offered to send me one. And I actually asked you to sign it for me and you did, which I really appreciate. So I guess the last thing I would ask you is, looking back on all of it, is there a particular time in your life when you feel like you'd like to go back to younger Erica and give her some insight about what you know now you didn't know then? What would you say to her, and when would that have been?
I think I would have been probably when I was first starting out as a journalist. I was 19 and I lied about my age to all my coworkers. And I said I was 21 because I wanted to be a little bit older and seem a little more sophisticated. I don't know why I thought that a bunch of 35-year-olds would think 21 meant anything.
Yes. That is kind of funny.
But I, you know, and I think that kind of started me down a path at that first job of just always feeling a little bit fraudulent and always feeling like I wasn't quite good enough and I needed to do more to prove myself. And I think I would go back and just say, you know, you're enough. Like, you are enough as you are right now. And you don't need to, you know, it wouldn't be about drinking, but it would just be about, it's okay not to know everything, because you have a lot of growing up to do, and you have a lot of time to do that.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. Like, I still have my moments of feeling like I'm not enough. I mean, I'm sure you do too. I mean, we're so hard on ourselves.
Yeah. And there's so much, I mean, especially, when you're a woman getting older, you really have to filter out a lot of crap and a lot of crap messages, about your worth. Because you start to become invisible, like around 35 or so. And you have to start, teach yourself to care about different things. And, it's, you can definitely internalize those messages or figure out a way to ignore them and counteract them.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate this. I've enjoyed talking. And, so I want you to keep us in mind, and I'm sure there are more books, right?
I certainly hope so. Yeah. I've got a couple of ideas.
You'd be welcome to come back anytime you want and be on again. I'd love to have you on again.
Awesome. Well, likewise, this was so much fun, and I really appreciate your reaching out.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. All right, there you go. Another episode in the books. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the show and this episode's guest at thepathtooauthenticity.com. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with someone. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps. I want to thank the band Punk Rock Opera, whose music you hear throughout the show. Their songs are used with permission from the artist and under a Creative Commons license. If you're so inclined, check out the Patreon community. As soon as I do these interviews, I upload them to Patreon, where the content is only available to patrons, and for just a couple bucks a month. I usually post audio content, their exclusive audio content, probably 8 times a month, if not more. And as these new episodes are released, as soon as they're done, they're available to patrons. So sometimes that might be 2 weeks before an episode is released, or even longer. Usually it's a few days. Anyway, if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. So thanks again for investing your time. It's a big deal to me. Thank you for supporting me and supporting the show. I hope you keep coming back. Be nice.
That's our story. I hope you enjoyed the punk rock opera. And we have one last piece of music for you. It goes like this.
Okay, go.
makers, we are the Gen X men. We're just the losers that lived up the street, living on these chords, simple beats. You wanna cheat, you wanna stop, you wanna tear us down. We are the bad plans, man, we got our roots stuck in the ground.
Musical generation, self-made bands. We cut our teeth with bloody hands. The rage has instilled in us. Can feed a crowd, give them a rush. Thank you. Good night.